A lot of times there's a tendency in certain Christian circles to look at Marian devotion as sort of a made-up thing, something which the Catholic Church has sort of made up to suit its own purposes. Whereas in reality, Marian devotion is very much grounded in the Scriptures, not just the New Testament, but the Old Testament as well. And this comes through in this really famous story from the Gospel of Luke chapter 1, the story of the Visitation, where the Blessed Virgin Mary visits her cousin Elizabeth and stays with her for 3 months in the aftermath of the Annunciation. Now, an important prerequisite to understanding the Visitation, you need to know something about the Ark of the Covenant. Now, a lot of us have obviously at least heard of the Ark of the Covenant from that first Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. But historically speaking, what was the Ark of the Covenant? In the context of the Old Testament, the Ark of the Covenant was generally held to be the most sacred vessel in all of Israel, because it represented the very presence of God. And in particular, the Ark of the Covenant contained 3 things: a portion of manna, that food which sustained the ancient Israelites during their pilgrim journey from the land of Egypt to the Promised Land, at least part of the 2 tablets containing the 10 Commandments brought down from Mount Sinai by the prophet Moses, and then finally the staff of Aaron, Aaron of course being the high priest of Israel. And on top of that, it's really important to know that around the 6th century, around the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, the Ark of the Covenant completely disappeared, although there remained this Old Testament promise that one day in the future, the Ark of the Covenant, along with the presence of God, would finally return. But you see, hold that thought now and think about the Visitation, beginning with the greeting that Mary receives from her cousin Elizabeth. So basically, Elizabeth says to the Blessed Virgin Mary 2 things. First of all, what she says is, "Blessed are you amongst women." Now, on the face of it, this might sound like kind of a nothing statement, but it actually has great historical significance, especially when it comes to the Old Testament. Because basically, in the context of the Old Testament, there are 2 warrior women who are referred to as being blessed. One is called Jael, and the other one is named Judith. And what they have in common, funny enough, is that they both destroy foreign generals by attacking them specifically at the head. And so in the case of Jael, she very famously drives a tent peg through the head of a foreign general. And in a similar way, Judith cuts off the head of another foreign general. And what you're meant to see in both these different stories is a certain parallel to the book of Genesis, specifically the so-called first gospel. And so as you might recall, in the context of the book of Genesis, there is the creation narrative and the story of the advent of original sin. And what happens is that God the Father, basically he rebukes the ancient serpent and proclaims, again, the first gospel, this great prophecy that one day in the future, this woman will appear, whose seed will crush the head of the ancient serpent. And so if you put it all together, by calling the Blessed Virgin Mary blessed, her cousin Elizabeth is identifying her with being yet another warrior woman, and specifically the woman referred to in the first gospel, again, whose seed will eventually crush the head of the ancient serpent. In any case, the second thing Elizabeth says in her greeting to the Blessed Virgin Mary is that she calls her the mother of my Lord, as opposed to the mother of Jesus. And that's really significant, actually, because that particular title, again, the mother of my Lord, is actually a very particular reference to the so-called Queen Mother in the context of ancient Israel. And so basically, as a matter of background, in the context of ancient Israel, whenever a new Davidic king was named in the region of Judah, the Queen Mother was actually his mother, as opposed to his wife. And the Queen Mother wasn't just some empty figurehead, but she actually had real powers involving governance, intercession, as well as actually advising the king on matters involving the kingdom. And so therefore, in the context of the Visitation, when Elizabeth calls her cousin the mother of my Lord, basically what she's saying is that Mary is the Queen Mother in relation to the new Davidic king, which of course is Christ the Lord. But quite apart from the details of this particular greeting directed again to the Blessed Virgin Mary, it's also really important to notice a certain parallel between the story of the Visitation and this really famous story from the Old Testament from 2 Samuel chapter 6 involving King David. And so basically what you hear in the context of this Old Testament story is that King David brings the Ark of the Covenant from the region of Judah, which finds a certain narrative parallel in the way that Mary visits her cousin Elizabeth in the land of Judah herself. In the context of the story involving King David, as he's bringing the Ark of the Covenant from the land of Judah to the city of Jerusalem, he makes a pit stop at this private home for a period of 3 months, which again finds a certain parallel to the story of the Visitation in the sense that Mary stays with her cousin Elizabeth also for a period of 3 months. And then finally, what we hear in the context of 2 Samuel chapter 6 is that when King David finally brings the Ark of the Covenant to the holy city of Jerusalem, the people rejoice, and he himself leaps and dances in the presence of the Ark. In the same way that in the context of the Visitation, Elizabeth rejoices in the presence of her cousin, and of course the child in Elizabeth's womb, otherwise known as John the Baptist, leaps for joy in the presence of the Christ child in Mary's womb. So given all that, if you put it all together, the mystery of the Visitation reveals to us that Mary isn't simply the woman referred to in the first gospel from the book of Genesis. She is also the Queen Mother. And on top of that, she is the new Ark of the Covenant who has finally returned to the people of God. And with that, she has brought to these same people the fulfillment of those three things contained in the original Ark. And so instead of manna, she brings the true bread from heaven, the true bread of life, the Eucharist itself. Instead of some remnant of the Ten Commandments, she brings within her very womb the fulfillment of the law. And then finally, of course, instead of Aaron's staff, she brings again within her womb the true high priest, the one in whose very person we find the reconciliation of humanity and divinity. Okay, one final detail, and I'll kind of end with this. And so you notice that the story of the Visitation ends with the Magnificat, this hymn of praise sung on the lips of the Blessed Virgin Mary herself, which begins with something like this. My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in the Lord my Savior, and so on and so forth. And I guess the thing I want to impress upon you with regards to this particular hymn is that primarily, above anything else, it's meant to be sort of a narrative pause, which invites us explicitly to stop and pause, to taste and see, to keep and ponder, as an essential part of Marian spirituality, to reflect on all these wonderful things revealed to us by the Lord through the gospel in the context of the Advent season, because quite honestly, it's quite a lot. And even though there are obviously many things we could be thankful for, perhaps I might suggest that the occasion of the Visitation reminds us specifically to give thanks to the Blessed Virgin Mary for her great yes, her great fiat. Because of her great yes, she has fulfilled that great prophecy, again from the book of Genesis. She has become the Queen Mother. She has become the new Ark of the Covenant. And more to the point, because of her great yes, made in fear and trembling and with great humility and trust, Jesus Christ has come to save us and to save the world. And may God bless you all.